The morning shift at Vortex Prime Communications Hub started like any other day. Velnara stretched her crystalline limbs and activated her workstation with a soft, mental command. As a member of the Catherian species, her silicon-based biology made her perfect for monitoring the galaxy's endless stream of communications. Her kind could process thousands of channels simultaneously without strain. She settled into her routine, watching the familiar dance of data streams flowing across her screens. Trade requests from the Centauran colonies, scientific papers from the Altarian research stations, cultural exchanges between the gas giant dwellers and the asteroid miners, and always, threading through it all like a constant heartbeat, the warm chatter from human space. Humans were still newcomers to the galactic community. They had achieved faster-than-light travel only 300 years ago, which was barely a moment in galactic terms. Most species took thousands of years to develop interstellar capability. Yet somehow these young mammals had become the unofficial guardians of known space. Their ships patrolled the dangerous outer rim territories where few others dared to venture. Their colonies served as early warning stations against threats from dark space. Their diplomats had an unusual talent for making enemies talk instead of fight. In just 3 centuries, they had made themselves indispensable. Velnara liked monitoring human frequencies. Unlike the formal, ritualized communications of older species, humans were wonderfully chaotic. They shared jokes between star systems. They sent birthday messages across light years. They even broadcast music into the void, just because they thought someone might enjoy hearing it. But today, something was wrong. Velnara's primary sensory cluster focused on the section of her display dedicated to human space. The normally active frequencies showed only static. She ran a quick diagnostic on her equipment, thinking there might be a technical problem. Everything checked out perfectly. She tried accessing the quantum communication networks that connected major human worlds. Nothing. The subspace channels they used for emergency communications were equally silent. Even the old-fashioned radio broadcasts that humans seemed to love were completely absent. A cold sensation spread through her crystalline core. In 3 centuries of galactic monitoring, human space had never gone completely quiet. Even during their brief civil conflicts or natural disasters, some signals always got through. Humans were too scattered, too independent, too chatty to ever fall completely silent. Velnara activated her emergency protocols and sent a priority alert to the communications director. Within minutes, Director Zixthul materialized at her station. The ancient ethereal's energy form flickered with concern. "Show me," the director commanded, his voice resonating through multiple dimensions. Velnara displayed her findings. Together, they watched the empty frequencies where Earth's signals should be flowing. They tried backup channels, emergency networks, even the primitive electromagnetic broadcasts that humans used for local communications. Everything was dead. "When did this begin?" Director Zixthul asked. "Approximately 4 hours ago, Galactic Standard Time. All human frequencies went dark within a 37-minute window." The director's energy form pulsed rapidly, which Velnara recognized as extreme agitation. In his million-year lifespan, he had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations. This pattern meant something to him. "Continue monitoring," he ordered. "Alert me immediately if any signal is detected. And Velnara, begin emergency archival procedures for all human communications from the past century." "Sir, is that necessary?" "I hope not. But if I'm right about what this means, those archives may be all that's left of them." The director vanished, leaving Velnara alone with her screens and a growing sense of dread. She had never heard fear in an ethereal's voice before. Their species had transcended physical existence eons ago. What could frighten beings who had survived the heat death of their original universe? Across the galaxy, other monitoring stations were reaching the same terrible conclusion. On the Centauran defense platform, Commander Vextar stared at his tactical displays in disbelief. Every human patrol ship had stopped responding. Every human colony had gone dark. The massive early warning network that humanity had built along the galactic rim was completely silent. "Sir," his aide reported, "we're detecting massive energy signatures moving through the outer void. multiple contacts heading toward the galactic disk. Vextar's scaled hide rippled with ancient fear responses. His species had evolved as prey animals before achieving sentience, and something deep in his genetic memory was screaming warnings. How long since the human signal stopped? 4 hours and 17 minutes, sir. And how long since we detected the approaching contacts? 4 hours and 15 minutes, sir. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Vextar had fought alongside human forces for decades. He knew their protocols, their strategies, their stubborn refusal to retreat from any fight. For them to go silent at the exact moment unknown contacts approached from dark space could only mean one thing. They were all dead. But what could kill humanity so quickly and completely? Their colonies were spread across dozens of star systems. Their fleets were among the most advanced in the galaxy. Their soldiers were legendary for their refusal to surrender. What force could silence them all in under 40 minutes? The answer came from the most unexpected source. Deep in the archive worlds where the galaxy's oldest civilizations stored their most precious memories, ancient security systems began activating. Automated warnings that had remained dormant for tens of thousands of years suddenly burst to life. Dr. Zenith, the galaxy's foremost expert on extinction events, was pulled from her research by emergency alerts she had never seen before. The Archive's central consciousness, an entity older than most star systems, spoke directly into her mind with words that turned her blood to ice. The silence has returned. The pattern repeats. Prepare for the harvest. Zenith rushed to the deepest vaults, where records of the galaxy's greatest disasters were kept. She accessed files that hadn't been opened in 50,000 years, reading accounts of civilizations that had simply vanished overnight. Each record described the same sequence of events. Advanced species going silent, followed by the approach of something from beyond the galactic edge. The files called them by many names: the endless hunger, the void that walks, the shepherds of entropy. But the most common term appearing in dozens of extinct languages translated simply as the Devourers. According to the ancient records, the Devourers moved through the galaxy in cycles, consuming not just planets or species, but the very concept of organized matter itself. They left behind regions of space where physics broke down, where cause and effect became meaningless, where existence itself became impossible. The last great war against them had ended 50,000 years ago with their defeat, if it could be called a defeat. The surviving records suggested they had been driven beyond the galactic rim, but not destroyed. The ancient coalition forces had simply delayed them, bought time for new civilizations to evolve and grow, and now they were returning. Zenith's research confirmed the pattern. In every previous cycle, the galaxy's most advanced species went silent first, not because they were cowards, but because they recognized the threat and tried to hide. It never worked. The Devourers always found them eventually. But humanity's case was different. Previous species had gone silent gradually, over weeks or months as they tried to hide their civilizations. Humans had vanished all at once, in perfect coordination. Either they had been destroyed with impossible efficiency, or they had chosen to disappear. Neither option offered much hope. On Kepler Station, the galaxy's diplomatic center, an emergency session of the Galactic Council was called. Representatives from every major species materialized in the Great Assembly Hall, their various forms of life creating a riot of colors, sounds, and energy patterns. Ambassador Zethkri of the Altarian Collective called for order. His reptilian features were grim as he addressed the gathering. Fellow beings, we face an unprecedented crisis. The human species appears to have vanished completely from galactic communications. Given humanity's crucial role in rim defense and threat detection, this silence raises serious security concerns. A chorus of worried sounds filled the chamber. The elderly Torgan representative, speaking through his translation device, voiced what many were thinking. In my species' long memory, only one thing has ever caused such complete and sudden silence. If the ancient records are accurate, we may be facing the return of the harvesters. The word sent ripples of terror through the assembly. Most species had legends about the harvesters, though they used different names. Some called them the dark between stars. Others knew them as the end of stories. But all the legends agreed on one thing: when they returned, civilizations didn't survive. Dr. Lysa Caney, the only human present in the assembly, stood to address the council. She was a xenobiologist who had been stationed on Kepler Station for the past 5 years, studying the genetic diversity of galactic species. Now she found herself representing all of humanity, though she had no idea what had happened to her people. "Honored representatives," she began, her voice steady despite her fear. "I've been trying to contact Earth and all human colonies for the past 6 hours. The silence is complete, but I refuse to believe my species is dead. Humans don't give up. We don't surrender. If we've gone quiet, there's a reason." "Perhaps they recognize the futility of resistance," suggested the Vegan Empire's warmind. "Records indicate that species facing the harvesters often choose quick deaths over slow consumption." "No," Caney said firmly. "You don't understand humans. We've never chosen the easy death. When faced with impossible odds, we dig in deeper. We fight harder. We find ways to turn disadvantages into weapons. If my people are silent, they're planning something." But even as she spoke the words, doubt crept into her heart. She had tried every method of communication she knew. Personal, quantum entanglement links with her family, emergency military channels, even the simple radio frequencies her grandmother used to contact the Mars Gardens. All of them were dead. The council session continued for hours, but it was really just organized panic. Species after species reported the same thing: complete communications blackout from human space, massive energy signatures approaching from the galactic void, and activation of ancient warning systems that hadn't functioned in 50 millennia. Plans were made for evacuation of core worlds. Ancient weapon stockpiles were authorized for activation. Defense fleets that had never worked together began attempting to coordinate strategies. But everyone knew the truth that no one wanted to say aloud. If the harvesters had returned and humanity was already gone, the rest of the galaxy had very little time left. As the council session ended, Dr. Caney found herself alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. Somewhere out there, Earth was still spinning around its yellow sun. Mars was still red with iron oxide. The asteroid miners were still floating in their rocky fields, but none of them were talking. She pressed her hand against the cool transparency of the viewing port and whispered a prayer to whatever gods might listen. Please let them be alive, please let them have a plan. Because if humanity is really gone, we're all about to find out what extinction looks like. Far below in the communications center, Velnara continued her hopeless vigil, scanning empty frequencies and praying for even the smallest sign that somewhere in human space, someone was still alive to answer. But the silence stretched on, absolute and terrifying, while unknown shapes moved through the dark between the stars. The galaxy's youngest children had gone quiet, and with them, perhaps all hope of seeing another dawn. In the deepest research facilities, scientists worked frantically to understand the approaching threat. Ancient texts were translated and retranslated. Computer models ran countless scenarios. Weapons that hadn't been fired in millennia were tested and prepared. But deep down, everyone knew the truth that their ancestors had learned at terrible cost. When the harvesters returned, the galaxy didn't fight back. It just died, piece by piece, until nothing remained but empty space and broken physics. And this time, the Guardians who had always stood watch on the rim were already gone. Dr. Zenith had not slept in 47 hours. Her species could function for weeks without rest when necessary, but the stress of her discoveries was wearing on her mind. The archive worlds contained the collected knowledge of hundreds of civilizations, spanning millions of years, and she was racing through records that most beings were never meant to see. The pattern was undeniable. Every 50,000 years, like clockwork, the galaxy's most advanced species simply vanished. The Nexari Empire, masters of dimensional engineering. The Crystal Singers, who could manipulate matter with pure sound. The ethereal ancients, who had transcended physical form eons before most species had even evolved. All of them had reached the peak of their power, and then they were gone. But the records showed something else, something that made Zenith's core temperature drop several degrees. In every case, these vanished civilizations had gone silent in the exact same way humanity just had. Complete communication blackout across all their territories happening simultaneously, with no distress calls or explanations. Computer, she commanded the archive's ancient intelligence. Cross-reference the disappearance patterns with gravitational anomaly reports from the same time periods. The response came instantly, data flowing directly into her consciousness. In every case, massive gravitational disturbances had been detected at the galaxy's edge exactly 4 hours and 15 minutes after the advanced species went silent. The same interval that had passed between humanity's silence and the current unknown contacts approaching from dark space. Zenith felt her logical mind rejecting the implications. It was impossible. Nothing could coordinate such perfect timing across thousands of years and vast distances. Yet the evidence was overwhelming. She accessed the most restricted files, records so dangerous that they were locked behind quantum, encryption, and psychic barriers. These told the story of the Devourers themselves, pieced together from the scattered accounts of survivors and the final transmissions of dying worlds. The Devourers were not a species in any conventional sense. They were entropy given form, chaos with purpose, the universe's own immune system turning against the complex structures that had grown within it. They moved through space like a plague, but they didn't just destroy civilizations. They unmade them. Worlds touched by the Devourers didn't become lifeless rocks. They became regions where matter forgot how to hold together, where energy dispersed into meaningless static, where the laws of physics themselves began to break down. The Devourers consumed order itself, leaving behind pockets of space where existence became impossible. But the most terrifying part was their intelligence. They weren't mindless destroyers. They were strategic, patient, and impossibly ancient. They had been doing this for millions of years, moving through galaxy after galaxy in vast cycles, harvesting the accumulated complexity of eons of evolution, and they always knew which species to target first. Captain Sarah Chen sat in the command chair of the research vessel Curiosity, staring at her communications panel with growing frustration. She had been trying to reach Earth for 8 hours now, using every method she knew. The ship's quantum entanglement communicator should have been able to reach Earth instantaneously across any distance, but it was producing nothing but interference. Chen was a xenogeologist, leading a deep space expedition to study unusual mineral formations in the void regions beyond the galactic rim. Her team had been investigating a cluster of crystalline asteroids that seemed to defy conventional formation theories. They were supposed to return to Earth in 2 weeks with their findings. Now she wasn't sure there would be an Earth to return. To Captain, called Dr. Martinez from the sensor station. I'm detecting massive gravitational anomalies at bearing 27 Mark 6. Range approximately 40 light years and closing. Chen moved to the sensor console and studied the readings. What she saw made no sense. The gravitational signatures were enormous, suggesting objects with the mass of small stars. But there were no stars in that region of space. According to all their charts, it was empty void. Could these be some kind of natural phenomenon? She asked. Martinez shook his head. The movement patterns are too regular. These objects are under intelligent control. And Captain, they're big. Each signature suggests a mass roughly equivalent to our moon, but they're moving at incredible speeds. How many contacts? Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. It's hard to get an accurate count because they seem to be partially phased out of normal spacetime. Chen felt her skin crawl. She had spent years studying the universe's strangest phenomena, but she had never encountered anything that could exist partially outside normal reality. The implications were staggering. Set course. For the nearest human colony, she ordered, maximum speed. If something's coming from the void, we need to warn people. But even as she gave the order, Chen suspected they were already too late. The timing was too perfect. Humanity goes silent, and immediately afterward, massive unknown objects appear, from the direction of empty space. Either her species was already dead, or they had seen this coming and chosen to hide. Neither possibility offered much comfort. Back on Vortex Prime, The emergency expanded beyond the communications hub. Hi, Admiral Korthax of the Hegemony Defense Fleet materialized in the crisis center, his massive insectoid form clicking with agitation. Behind him came representatives from every major military force in the galaxy. "Report," he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought in hundreds of battles across multiple star systems. Velnara, now serving as the primary briefing officer, displayed her findings on the central hologram. Complete communications blackout from all human territories began 8 hours ago. Simultaneously, long-range sensors have detected massive unknown contacts approaching from beyond the galactic rim. Admiral Korthax studied the data with the practiced eye of a career military officer. His species, the Hegemony, had evolved from pack hunters. Their tactical instincts were among the sharpest in the galaxy. These approach vectors, he mused. They're not random. The unknown contacts are moving to surround key strategic points throughout the galaxy. Whoever or whatever they are, they understand our defensive positions. General Thaxel of the Altarian Collective leaned forward. "Admiral, with respect, our immediate concern should be determining what happened to the humans. Their colonies, guard 17 critical choke points along the rim. If they've been compromised, our entire early warning system is blind. I'm more concerned about what's coming behind them." Admiral Korthax replied. "The humans didn't just disappear, they were silenced. Something wanted them quiet before it made its move." Dr. Zenith's voice crackled through the communication system from the archive worlds. "Gentlemen, I've completed my analysis of the historical records. What we're seeing matches a pattern that repeats every 50,000 years. The last occurrence was during the Devourer War." The room fell silent. Every species had legends about the Devourer War, though most had dismissed them as mythology. The idea that something could threaten the entire galaxy seemed impossible in the modern age of advanced technology and interstellar cooperation. "Impossible," General Thaxel said. "The Devourers are legend, stories told to frighten children." "The records are quite clear," Zenith replied. "The Devourers are real, and they follow a predictable pattern. They target the galaxy's most advanced species first, eliminating those most capable of organizing resistance. Then they move systematically through the remaining civilizations. But the humans aren't the most advanced species," Admiral Korthax objected. "By any technological measure, the Ethereals or the Quantum Collective far exceed their capabilities." "Advancement isn't just about technology," Zenith explained. "It's about adaptability, growth rate, and potential for future development. By those measures, humanity represents the greatest threat to entities that prefer static, easily predicted prey." The implications hung heavy in the air. If the records were accurate, humanity hadn't been destroyed because they were weak. They had been targeted because they were dangerous. Admiral Korthax began issuing orders with military precision. "All fleets to condition red. Begin immediate evacuation of outer rim colonies. Activate ancient defense protocols. And someone, get me a direct line to the Quantum Collective. If we're facing what I think we're facing, we're going to need every weapon ever built." But even as the galaxy's military forces began their desperate preparations, everyone in the room knew they were probably already too late. The Devourers had eliminated humanity in under an hour. How long could the rest of them last? On a small science vessel called the Endurance, stationed near the galactic core, Commander Yeltar received the emergency broadcasts with growing confusion. The report spoke of humanity's disappearance and approaching threats from the void. But his sensors were showing something else entirely. Human space wasn't empty, it was hidden. Yeltar's ship carried experimental detection equipment designed to study dark matter interactions. Unlike conventional sensors, his instruments could detect energy signatures that existed partially outside normal space-time. And when he pointed them toward human territories, he found massive amounts of activity. "Science Officer Quinn," he called to his aide, "what do you make of these readings?" Quinn studied the data with her species' characteristic thoroughness. The Analytical Collective prided themselves on precise measurements and logical conclusions. "Commander, these energy patterns suggest massive industrial activity throughout human space. But it's all happening in quantum frequencies that conventional sensors can't detect. It's as if they've shifted their entire civilization into parallel dimensions. Could they be hiding? Not hiding, sir, preparing. These energy signatures match theoretical models for large-scale reality manipulation. If I didn't know better, I'd say the humans are rebuilding the fundamental structure of space-time in their territories. Yeltar felt a chill run through his uniform. Rebuilding it how? I'm not sure, sir. But whatever they're doing, it's on a scale I've never seen before. They're not just moving ships or building weapons. They're changing the basic rules of physics in their local regions of space. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't been destroyed or hidden. They had chosen to become something else entirely. But the question remained. What were they becoming? And why? As reports continued to flow in from across the galaxy, a picture began to emerge that was somehow even more frightening than simple extinction. The approaching unknown contacts were slowing down as they entered the galaxy proper. Long-range scans suggested they were enormous, each one larger than most space stations. But they weren't moving like ships or even living creatures. They moved like predators that had found a familiar hunting ground. Dr. Caney sat in her quarters, on Kepler Station, staring at a photo of her family back on Earth. Her sister Maria worked in the Luna City agricultural domes. Her parents lived in the New Zealand Collective, tending vertical farms that fed half the Pacific region. Her nephew Jake was just starting his first year at the Mars Technical Institute. All of them were silent now. Not dead, she told herself firmly. Just silent. But as she watched the emergency broadcasts and listened to the growing panic in the diplomatic quarters, she couldn't shake the feeling that humanity's silence was different from the historical pattern. The ancient species had gone quiet out of fear, trying to hide from something they couldn't fight. Humans didn't hide. When faced with impossible odds, they did impossible things. Caney activated her personal communication array and sent a message on an old emergency frequency that few people knew about. It was a channel her father had set up years ago, a backup system using quantum tunneling effects that bypassed conventional networks. She didn't expect a response, but 37 minutes later her communicator chimed softly. The message was brief. Lisa, safe. Trust the silence. Come home when the stars change. Love, Dad. It was impossible. The quantum tunneling effect should have made real-time communication across galactic distances physically impossible. Yet somehow, her father had sent a message that arrived faster than light could travel, which meant either the laws of physics had changed, or humanity had found a way to change them. Caney looked out her window at the stars, noting how they seemed to shimmer differently than they had that morning. Something was happening out there, something that went far beyond simple communications, blackouts, or approaching threats. Humanity had gone silent, but they weren't gone. They were becoming something new, and the galaxy was about to find out what happens when the universe's most stubborn species decides to evolve. The first attack came without warning. The Hegemony Patrol Fleet's steadfast resolution was conducting routine sweeps of the outer rim when reality simply stopped working around them. Commander Yexthal watched in horror as his lead destroyer began to dissolve, not exploding or burning, but simply ceasing to exist piece by piece. All ships, emergency jump to, he began, but his words died as he realized there was nowhere to jump to. The space around them was becoming something else. Something that didn't follow the rules of normal existence. The thing that emerged from the void was impossible to describe properly. It was larger than a moon, but moved like liquid shadow. It had mass enough to distort nearby stars, yet seemed to exist only partially in their dimension. Looking at it directly caused crew members to scream as their minds tried to process geometry that shouldn't exist. One of the devourers had arrived. It moved through the Hegemony fleet like a shark through a school of fish. Ships that had survived. Battles with pirates, rebels, and natural disasters simply came apart when the entity's attention touched them, not destroyed by weapons or torn apart by forces, but unmade at the most basic level. Commander Yexthal managed to get off one last transmission before his own ship began to dissolve around him. Galaxy Command, this is steadfast resolution. The legends are true, they're real, and they're here. Tell my spawn The message cut off as the ship's quantum communication array forgot how to exist. Within hours, similar reports began coming in from across the galaxy's edge. Ancient species that had hidden in the deep void for millennia emerged in panic, fleeing toward the galactic core with tales of entire star systems being consumed by things that moved like living nightmares. On Kepler Station, the emergency session of the Galactic Council had become a permanent crisis center. Species that had been enemies for thousands of years now worked together with desperate cooperation. The proud Altarian collective shared military secrets with their rivals, the Centauran Alliance. The isolationist crystal mines opened their neutron star fortresses to refugees from any species. Ambassador Zethkri stood before a three-dimensional tactical display that showed the galaxy's current state. Red zones marked areas where devourer activity had been confirmed. Yellow zones indicated regions where communications had been lost. Green zones showed areas still under Allied control. The map was mostly red and yellow. Current projections show complete galactic consumption within 18 months if the devourers maintain their current rate of advance, reported the Council's strategic AI. Evacuation of core worlds should begin immediately. Evacuate to where? Demanded General Thaxel. The records show they've done this to countless galaxies. Running just delays the inevitable. Dr. Zenith materialized in the chamber via quantum projection from the archive worlds. Her usual calm demeanor was cracked with exhaustion and fear. "I've found additional information," she announced. "The Devourers don't actually destroy everything. They're selective. They consume order, complexity, and organized information. Simple matter and basic energy they leave behind." "What does that mean for us?" Zethkri asked. "It means they're not just killing civilizations. They're harvesting them. They feed on the accumulated complexity that takes millions of years for life to build. Stars, planets, basic elements, those remain. But everything that makes a civilization what it is gets consumed." The revelation sent a wave of despair through the assembled representatives. They weren't facing an enemy that wanted their worlds or their resources. They were facing something that wanted to eat the very concept of organized existence. Admiral Korthax activated the tactical display's long-range sensors. "If the historical pattern holds, we have perhaps 6 months before they reach the core worlds. But I'm seeing something unusual in their approach patterns." The display zoomed in on the advancing devourer forces. Instead of the random distribution that might be expected from a spreading plague, the entities were moving in very specific formations. They were avoiding certain regions of space entirely while concentrating their forces around others. "They're steering clear of the human territories," Admiral Korthax observed. "Even though those regions appear empty, the Devourers are maintaining a safe distance." Dr. Caney, who had been silent throughout most of the briefing, suddenly stood up. "That's because they're not empty. The humans are still there and the Devourers know it." "Impossible," General Thaxel protested. "We've scanned those systems with every sensor array in the galaxy. There's nothing there." "Nothing that we can detect," Caney corrected. "But I've been studying human psychology for years. My species doesn't just disappear when threatened. We adapt. We find ways to fight back that our enemies don't expect." She activated her personal data pad and showed the assembly her findings. "I've been monitoring quantum fluctuation patterns around human space. The readings are subtle, but they're there. The humans haven't vanished. They've done something to themselves, something that puts them beyond conventional detection." Admiral Korthax studied her data with professional interest. "These fluctuation patterns are consistent with large-scale consciousness transfer or distributed intelligence networks. Are you suggesting the humans have somehow uploaded themselves into quantum fields?" "I'm suggesting they've become something new," Caney replied. "Something the Devourers haven't encountered before." Captain Chen's ship had been traveling toward the nearest human colony for 12 hours when her long-range sensors detected something that made her blood run cold. A Devourer entity was approaching the colony system, its massive form distorting space around it like a black hole made of living shadow. "All stop," she ordered. "Deploy stealth fields and passive sensors only." The Curiosity went dark, drifting. on momentum as its crew watched the impossible entity approach the Proxima Centauri system. According to their records, over 2 million humans lived in the various habitats around Proxima's 3 planets. Chen expected to witness another massacre, like the one that had destroyed the Hegemony fleet. The Devourer moved into the system with predatory confidence, its form beginning to expand as it prepared to feed. Then something unprecedented happened. The space around the Devourer began to resist it, not with weapons or shields, but with the fundamental forces of reality itself. Gravity fields that should have been predictable became chaotic. Electromagnetic radiation that should have followed known patterns started behaving like living things. Even light itself seemed to turn hostile to the entity's presence. The Devourer recoiled, its form contracting as if in pain. It circled the system several times, probing for weaknesses, but each attempt to enter was met with increasing resistance from space itself. Finally, the entity retreated, moving away from the system at high speed. Chen stared at her sensor readings, in disbelief. "Dr. Martinez, did we just watch a Devourer get repelled by empty space?" "It wasn't empty, Captain. I'm reading massive quantum activity throughout the system. It's as if the humans have somehow merged their consciousness with the local space-time fabric. They've turned their entire star system into a living entity." The implications were staggering. If humanity had found a way to transform themselves into something that could resist the Devourers, they might have found the key to galactic survival. But it also meant they were no longer entirely human. On the archive worlds, Dr. Zenith made another disturbing discovery. The ancient records contained references to a species called the Gardeners, who had fought the Devourers during the previous cycle. According to the fragmentary accounts, the Gardeners had developed weapons that could wound the entities by striking at their existence in multiple dimensions simultaneously. But the Gardeners had paid a terrible price for their resistance. Transforming themselves into beings capable of fighting entities that existed partially outside reality, they had ceased to be recognizably alive in any conventional sense. The records suggested they had become something like living concepts, ideas given form and purpose. The last known transmission from the Gardeners, recorded 50,000 years ago, was haunting in its simplicity. "We hold the line between order and chaos. We are no longer what we were, but what we defended lives on. When the Devourers return, look for us in the spaces between thoughts." Zenith felt pieces of a vast puzzle clicking into place. The pattern wasn't just about species going silent before the Devourer attacks. It was about transformation, evolution forced by necessity. Each cycle, the galaxy's most adaptive species didn't just hide from the threat, they changed themselves to fight it. And humanity, the galaxy's youngest children, had somehow figured this out in just 3 centuries. Back on Kepler Station, Dr. Caney received another impossible message from her father. This time, it wasn't words but pure information that downloaded directly into her mind. Images, sensations, and knowledge that felt foreign yet familiar. She saw Earth, but not as she remembered it. The planet was still there, still blue and green and beautiful. But it was also something more. The cities weren't empty. They were integrated into vast networks of consciousness that spanned the electromagnetic spectrum. The humans weren't gone. They were everywhere at once, existing as distributed intelligence across multiple layers of reality, and they were angry. The final image in the data package showed something that made Caney gasp. Thousands of Devourer entities gathering at the galaxy's edge, but hesitating. They were afraid. These ancient beings that had consumed countless civilizations were actually afraid to enter human space. Because humanity hadn't just hidden or transformed. They had evolved into something that could hurt the Devourers back. The message ended, with coordinates and a simple instruction. "Come home, Lisa, it's time to finish what they started." As emergency klaxons wailed throughout Kepler Station and representatives from across the galaxy argued about evacuation routes and defense strategies, Dr. Kane quietly slipped away to the docking bays. She had a ship to catch and a species to rejoin. Behind her, the galaxy prepared for war. Ahead of her, humanity prepared for something that had never been attempted before. Not just survival against the devourers, but victory. The silence from Earth wasn't the end of humanity's story. It was the beginning of their transformation into something the universe had never seen before, something that could stand against entropy itself and win. Admiral Korthax watched the tactical displays with growing amazement as more reports came in. Devourer entities were being repelled from system after system in human space, not by weapons or fleets, but by the very nature of space itself, rising up in resistance. "It's impossible," he muttered to his aide. "Nothing should be able to make reality itself fight back." "Perhaps, sir," his aide suggested quietly. "We've been thinking about this wrong. Perhaps the humans haven't changed reality. Perhaps they've become part of it." The Admiral's compound eyes focused on the display showing human territories. They looked empty on conventional sensors, but the quantum readings suggested something, fast and patient and very much aware. Humanity had gone silent, but they hadn't gone away. They had become something new, something that could fight monsters that existed beyond the normal rules of existence. And across the galaxy, the Devourers were learning that their latest harvest was going to be very different from all the others. Captain Chen's ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, and she immediately knew that everything had changed. The space around Earth's sun felt different, charged with an energy that made her instruments fluctuate wildly and her skin tingle with static electricity. "Dr. Martinez," she called to her science officer, "what are your readings?" Martinez studied his displays with obvious confusion. "Captain, according to our sensors, this system contains approximately 3 billion more human life signs than it should. But they're not registering as being on planets or stations. They're everywhere." Chen moved to the navigation console and tried to raise Earth traffic control on standard frequencies. The response came immediately, but not through her communication system. The words simply appeared in her mind, spoken in a voice that sounded like her own but contained harmonics that hurt to hear. "Welcome home, Sarah. Please proceed to Luna Orbital Platform 7. Do not deviate from the provided flight path. And, Sarah, don't be afraid of what you're about to see." A navigation route appeared on her ship's computer, uploaded by methods her systems couldn't identify. The path took them on a winding course through the inner system that seemed to avoid certain regions of space entirely. As they followed the route, Chen began to understand why. Her sensors detected massive construction projects throughout the system, but they weren't built from metal or composite materials. They were constructed from organized space-time itself, reality carved and shaped into structures that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Earth was still there, still beautiful, still blue and green and alive. But it was also something more. The planet's electromagnetic field had been transformed into a vast neural network that extended throughout the solar system. Every satellite, every space station, every piece of human technology had been integrated into a single, impossibly complex intelligence. "Captain," Martinez said quietly, "I'm detecting over 8 billion individual human consciousness patterns, but they're all connected. They're not separate minds anymore. They're facets of something larger." Luna Platform 7 materialized around them as they approached, though Chen was certain it hadn't been there moments before. The docking bay accepted their ship with mechanical precision, but Chen could feel something vast and benevolent watching their every move. As they disembarked, they were met by what appeared to be a normal human woman in a standard environmental suit. But when she spoke, her voice carried the same impossible harmonics Chen had heard in her mind. "Hello, Sarah. I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, or I was. Now I'm the interface between what we were and what we've become. Please follow me. Your crew is safe, but you need to understand what's happening." They walked through corridors that seemed to stretch and contract based on their needs, past windows that showed views of Earth that couldn't possibly exist from their current position. Chen realized that the station wasn't just a building, it was a manifestation of collective human will, shaped by the combined consciousness of billions of minds. "How?" was all Chen could manage to ask. "We saw them coming," Vasquez explained. "Not with sensors or telescopes, but with dreams. About a year ago, humans across the galaxy started having the same nightmare. Ancient things moving through the void, hungry for the complexity we'd built. We knew we couldn't fight them with ships or weapons. They entered a vast chamber that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions. Chen could see Earth floating impossibly close, as if the planet had been folded through space to be present in the room. But she could also see other things, mathematical structures made of pure thought, consciousness patterns flowing like rivers of light, and underneath it all, the steady pulse of 8 billion human minds thinking as one. "So you did this," Chen said, gesturing at the impossible architecture around them. "We chose to evolve," Vasquez corrected. "Individually, each human consciousness is still intact, but we've connected ourselves through quantum fields that exist beneath normal space-time. We can think together, plan together, act together across any distance instantaneously. But why the silence? Why didn't you tell the rest of the galaxy what you were doing?" Vasquez's expression grew sad. "Because what we've become would terrify them almost as much as the Devourers. We're not entirely human anymore, Sarah. We're something between matter and information, between individual consciousness and collective intelligence. The other species would see us as a threat." Chen looked out at Earth, trying to process what she was seeing. The planet looked normal from a distance, but her enhanced sensors showed structures of organized energy threading through its core, connecting every living thing on the surface into a vast network of shared consciousness. "Are you still you?" she asked. "Yes and no," Vasquez replied. "I remember being Elena Vasquez, growing up in São Paulo, studying xenobiology, falling in love with Roberto, having children. But I also remember being every other human who ever lived. I carry the memories of farmers and soldiers, artists, and engineers, children and elders. We are individual, but we are also one." A new presence entered Chen's awareness, not through her eyes or ears, but directly into her thoughts. It felt like her grandmother's voice, warm and comforting, but amplified by the weight of billions of other voices. Sarah, the collective consciousness, spoke. "We need you to understand something. The Devourers aren't just destroyers, they're farmers. They plant the seeds of civilization, let them grow for 50,000 years, and then harvest the complexity that results. We are their crop." Images flooded Chen's mind. The galaxy as the Devourers saw it. Not a collection of worlds and species, but a garden of organized information ripe for consumption. Each civilization was a carefully tended plot, allowed to develop technology and culture and complexity until it reached optimal harvest conditions. Every species that evolved to intelligence was guided by their influence, the voice continued. They've been shaping galactic development for millions of years, ensuring that civilizations follow predictable patterns, until they encountered humanity. Chen felt the weight of revelation settling on her shoulders. "We were different. We were wrong," Vasquez said with a smile. "We evolved too fast, spread too quickly, adapted in ways they didn't predict. We were supposed to be a minor species, useful for labor and simple tasks. Instead, we became guardians and explorers and protectors. We ruined their careful plans. So they decided to end the cycle early," Chen realized. "Yes, but they made a mistake. They assumed that silencing our communications meant silencing us. They don't understand that humanity's greatest strength was never our technology or our weapons. It was our refusal to accept defeat." Through the station's enhanced sensors, Chen could see the approaching Devourer fleet in all its terrible glory. Thousands of entities, each one larger than most space stations moving through the void with ancient purpose. They were magnificent and terrifying, beings of pure entropy that had consumed the accumulated dreams of countless civilizations. But she could also see something else. Throughout human space, reality itself was being systematically modified. Not just around Earth, but around every human colony, every human outpost, every place where her species had touched the stars. Humanity was preparing something that had never been attempted before. "What's the plan?" she asked. Vasquez smiled, and for a moment she looked entirely human again. "We're going to do what we've always done when faced with impossible odds. We're going to do something impossible back. The collective consciousness spoke again, and this time Chen could hear the voices of everyone she had ever known woven into its words. Her parents, her childhood friends, her academy instructors, her ship's crew members from previous missions. All of them were there, individual yet united. The Devourers exist partially outside normal reality, the voice explained. That's why conventional weapons can't hurt them. But we've learned to exist partially outside reality too. We've made ourselves into something that can meet them on their own terms. Chen felt the truth of it settling into her bones. Humanity hadn't just hidden or transformed. They had evolved into something that could fight monsters that existed beyond the normal rules of existence. But the cost had been enormous. You're not human anymore, she said quietly. We're what humanity becomes when it has to save everyone else, Vasquez replied. We're still us, Sarah, but we're also more than us. We're the collective will of a species that refuses to let evil win. Through the station's quantum sensors, Chen watched as the first Devourer entities probed the edges of human space. Each time they tried to enter, reality itself pushed back. Space-time twisted and writhed, rejecting their presence with the combined will of billions of transformed human minds. The entities were learning what humanity had become, not just another species to be harvested, but gardeners themselves. Gardeners of reality, tending the universe's tendency toward order and complexity, protecting it from those who would see it consumed. The other species don't know what we've done, Chen observed. They will soon, the collective voice replied. When the final battle begins, we'll need their help, not to fight. We can handle the Devourers ourselves now, but to remember what we're fighting for. Chen felt tears running down her face as she truly understood the magnitude of humanity's sacrifice. They had given up their individual existence to become something that could protect everyone else. They had transformed themselves into living shields against entropy itself. What happens to me? She asked. That's your choice, Vasquez said gently. You can join us, become part of what we are now, or you can remain as you are, to serve as a bridge between us and the rest of the galaxy. Both paths have value, Chen Wei looked out at Earth one more time, seeing it now as it truly was. Not just a planet, but the core of a vast intelligence that spanned star systems, a consciousness built from the combined will of her entire species. It was beautiful and terrible and completely alien, yet somehow still felt like home. I need to think, she said. Of course. But don't think too long. The Devourers are almost here, and when they arrive, the galaxy is going to discover what happens when humanity stops being quiet and starts screaming back. Outside the station, space itself began to sing with the voices of 8 billion transformed souls, preparing for a war that would determine whether order or chaos ruled the universe. The age of silence was ending. The age of defiance was about to begin. The final assault began at dawn on 1,000 worlds simultaneously. Across the galaxy, the last free civilizations watched their sensors in terror as the Devourer fleet moved out of the void and into normal space. Each entity was a nightmare, made manifest, beings of pure entropy that existed in multiple dimensions at once. Their very presence made reality unstable, causing stars to flicker and planets to forget their orbits. On Kepler Station, Ambassador Zethkri coordinated the largest military alliance in galactic history. Species that had warred for millennia now shared tactical data and weapons technology with desperate cooperation. The proud Altarian fleet moved in formation with their ancient enemies, the Centauran Alliance. Even the mysterious Quantum Collective had emerged from their pocket dimensions to join the fight. But everyone knew it was hopeless. The historical records were clear. Conventional weapons couldn't harm entities that existed partially outside reality. The best they could do was buy time for civilians to evacuate deeper into the galactic core. Admiral Korthax reports that Devourer forces have reached the outer defensive perimeter, announced the tactical AI. Estimated time until core world contact, 14 hours. Zethkri studied the battle displays with growing despair. His fleets were fighting bravely, but Their weapons passed through the Devourer entities like light through water. Each engagement ended the same way, ships and crews simply ceasing to exist as the entities fed on the organized complexity they represented. Then something impossible happened. The space around Earth suddenly blazed with energy signatures that broke every known law of physics. The planet's electromagnetic field expanded outward like a shockwave, carrying with it patterns of organized information so complex that they made conventional computer systems crash just trying to process them. "What in the void is that?" Zethkri demanded. Dr. Caney, who had returned to the station just hours before, stepped forward with tears streaming down her face. "That's my species saying hello." The wave of transformed consciousness spread outward, from Earth at faster-than-light speeds, racing through quantum channels that humanity had learned to navigate. As it reached each human colony, each human outpost, each place where her people had ever lived, those locations blazed to life with the same impossible energy. But it wasn't just Earth. Every human settlement throughout the galaxy was responding, their populations joining the collective consciousness that was spreading across known space. Humanity was revealing itself not as a scattered collection of colonies, but as a single vast intelligence that had been quietly growing for months. Captain Chen watched from Luna Platform 7 as the transformation completed itself. 8 billion minds became one mind. Dozens of star systems became one weapon. The scattered human diaspora became a single entity, capable of existing across multiple dimensions simultaneously. And then Earth spoke again. The message wasn't transmitted through conventional channels. It arrived in the minds of every sentient being in the galaxy, spoken in their own languages, carrying emotions and concepts that no single species could have generated alone. "Citizens of the galaxy," the collective voice said, warm with humanity's compassion but hard with their determination. "We apologize for the deception, but secrecy was necessary. The entities you call devourers have been farming you for millions of years. Today, the harvest ends." Across the galaxy, the approaching devourer entities suddenly stopped their advance. For the first time in their ancient existence, they encountered something they didn't understand. The humans weren't running. They weren't hiding. They were advancing. The battle began in dimensions that most species couldn't even perceive. Reality itself became a battlefield as transformed humanity met the devourers in the spaces between thoughts, in the quantum foam that underlied existence, in the mathematical structures that gave shape to the universe. Admiral Korthax watched his sensors in amazement as space around the Devourer fleet began to revolt against their presence. Stars that should have been dimmed by their proximity burned brighter. Planets that should have been consumed instead began generating defensive fields made of pure organized information. They're not just fighting the Devourers, he realized. They're making reality itself immune to them. The Devourers, ancient beyond measure and experienced in consuming countless galaxies, found themselves facing something unprecedented. Every time they tried to feed on organized complexity, that complexity fought back. Every attempt to unmake order was met by new order springing up faster than they could consume it. But humanity's transformation had come at a cost that was only now becoming apparent. Dr. Caney could feel it through her quantum link with her transformed species. Each moment of resistance against the Devourers required enormous amounts of energy. The collective consciousness was burning through the accumulated complexity of human civilization to fuel their war against entropy. They were literally consuming themselves to save everyone else. On the archive worlds, Dr. Zenith made a final, crucial discovery. The ancient records contained one last file, sealed behind quantum locks that required the presence of a devourer attack to open. Inside was the true history of the galactic cycles. The devourers weren't just random destroyers. They were the universe's own mechanism for preventing too much order from accumulating in any one region. Their feeding served a cosmic purpose, maintaining the balance between entropy and organization that allowed new life to evolve. But the system was breaking down. The universe was growing older, colder, more prone to entropy. Each cycle, the devourers had to harvest more complexity to maintain the balance. Eventually, they would have to consume everything, unless something could change the rules entirely. Fascinating. The archive's ancient consciousness spoke into her mind. The humans have chosen to become something that breaks the cycle, not destroyers like the devourers, not temporary like previous civilizations, but permanent gardeners of reality itself. Back in the Sol system, the final confrontation was reaching its climax. The largest devourer entity, ancient beyond imagining, and bloated with the consumed dreams of 1,000,000 dead worlds, pushed directly toward Earth. Its very presence began to unravel the careful structures of space-time that humanity had built. But Earth pushed back. The planet itself became a weapon, its collective consciousness focused into a beam of pure, organized information that struck the devourer entity like a spear of crystallized reality. The ancient being recoiled, its form wavering as it encountered something it had never faced before. Not resistance, but transformation. Wherever the beam touched the entity, entropy reversed itself. Chaos became order. Random destruction became purposeful creation. The devourer wasn't being destroyed, it was being converted, transformed from an agent of entropy into a guardian of complexity. The entity's scream of rage and confusion echoed across multiple dimensions, reaching every corner of the galaxy. But humanity's response was louder still. The combined voice of a species that had chosen to become something impossible for the sake of protecting everyone else. "We are humanity," the collective voice declared, speaking to devourers and galactic citizens alike. "We are order standing against chaos, complexity defending itself against entropy, the future refusing to surrender to the past. You have fed on our galaxy for the last time." The effect spread outward like a wave. Other devourer entities, faced with the choice between retreat and transformation, began to withdraw toward the galactic edge. They were ancient and powerful, but they were also conservative. This new variable, a species that could fight entropy on its own terms, represented unknown risks. For the first time in their multi-million-year existence, the devourers retreated not because they were defeated, but because they were uncertain. Captain Chen watched the withdrawal through sensors that were only beginning to understand what they were seeing. The massive entities were pulling back, moving toward the dark spaces between galaxies. But they weren't fleeing in panic. They were withdrawing strategically, like generals who needed time to develop new tactics. "They'll be back," she said to Vasquez, who had appeared beside her. "Yes," the interface agreed. "But next time we'll be ready, and next time we won't be alone." Through the quantum network, Chen could sense humanity reaching out to other species throughout the galaxy, not to assimilate them or transform them, but to share what they had learned. The techniques for defending against entropy could be adapted to different forms of consciousness, different ways of organizing complexity. The Altarians could learn to strengthen their dimensional engineering. The crystal mines could reinforce their neutron star sanctuaries. The ethereals could anchor their transcendent existence more firmly in reality. Each species could become more than they were while remaining recognizably themselves. Dr. Caney stood in the observation deck of Kepler Station, watching as reports flowed in from across the galaxy. The devourer retreat was confirmed. Damaged systems were already beginning to repair themselves as reality reasserted its natural patterns. The immediate crisis was over, but the larger implications were just beginning to unfold. Humanity had broken a cycle that had repeated for millions of years. They had proved that the devourers could be opposed, that entropy could be fought and defeated. The galaxy would never be the same. "The humans saved us all," Admiral Korthak said, appearing beside her at the viewing port. "But at what cost? Are they still the species we knew?" Caney smiled, feeling the warm presence of transformed humanity touching her mind with familiar affection. "They're exactly the species we knew. They're just more of it now." Through the quantum network, she could sense her sister Maria tending gardens that now existed across multiple dimensions. Her parents were still farming, but now they grew crops of organized information that could feed the hungry void. Her nephew Jake was still studying engineering, but now he was helping to design structures that could exist in the spaces between realities. They were still human, But they were also humanity's answer to the universe's oldest question: what happens when life refuses to surrender to death? The answer was transformation, evolution, the stubborn insistence that consciousness and complexity deserved to exist. Humanity had looked at entropy itself and said no, and they had won. As the last devourer entities disappeared beyond the galactic edge, Earth's voice rang out across the quantum networks one final time. Not threatening or commanding, but gentle and reassuring, like parents telling their children that the monsters under the bed had been defeated. The galaxy is safe. The cycle is broken. We are still here, and we always will be. Sleep well, knowing that someone is watching the dark spaces between the stars. On 1,000 worlds, 1 billion species looked up at their skies and saw them differently than they had that morning. The stars no longer seemed distant and cold. They felt protected, watched over by guardians who had chosen to become something impossible for the sake of defending everything they loved. The day Earth went silent had ended not with extinction, but with evolution. Humanity had faced the universe's greatest threat and refused to surrender. Instead, they had transformed themselves into the universe's greatest protectors. And in the quiet spaces between the stars, their voices sang lullabies of defiance against the dark.
The massive starship hung silently in the darkness of space, its smooth silver hull reflecting the distant starlight. Inside the ship's observation deck, Admiral Gray of the Stellar Union stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching the small blue planet on the main screen. Earth, as its inhabitants called it, looked unremarkable among the thousands of worlds the Union had discovered. Another primitive world, Captain Miller said, standing beside the Admiral. They haven't even reached their moon in the last 50 years. Admiral Gray nodded slowly, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the polished floor. The Union scans had revealed a planet still dependent on fossil fuels, with most of their space activity limited to low-orbit satellites. Their most advanced computers were laughably simple compared to Union technology. "Look at this," Miller continued, bringing up a holographic display. "They're still using radio waves for communication. Actual electromagnetic radiation bouncing through their atmosphere." The Admiral allowed himself a small smile. In his 30 years of leading the Union's 7th Fleet, he had overseen the integration of dozens of worlds into their alliance. Some joined willingly, others required convincing, but all eventually recognized the benefits of Union membership. Earth would be no different. Their military capabilities, Gray asked, though he already knew the answer. Primitive projectile weapons, basic nuclear devices, and a handful of crude space stations. Nothing that could challenge even one of our scout ships. Miller paused, checking another readout. Though there is an unusual amount of electromagnetic noise around the planet, their broadcasting methods are inefficient. Gray dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. All developing worlds go through this phase. They blanket themselves in radio waves before discovering proper quantum communications. The ship's sensors registered thousands of different signals emanating from Earth's surface: entertainment broadcasts, communication channels, navigation beacons, and countless other transmissions. The humans seemed to rely on these signals for everything from finding their way around to watching their favorite shows. "Send the standard first contact package," Gray ordered. "Let's see how their governments react." Within hours, the Union's message reached Earth's major powers. The response was predictably chaotic. Their global communication networks exploded with activity, military forces went on high alert, and their primitive satellites tried to gather more information about the Union fleet. "They're scrambling their aircraft," reported Officer Thompson from his monitoring station. "Military bases worldwide are mobilizing. Several nations have moved their nuclear weapons to ready status." Gray watched the panicked reactions with mild amusement. It was always the same with primitive worlds. Their first instinct was to fight, not understanding how hopeless resistance would be. The Union's technology was centuries beyond anything Earth could muster. "Launch our probe network," Gray commanded. I want detailed scans of every major military installation and government facility. As the probes descended through Earth's atmosphere, the first anomalies appeared. Several units reported unexpected interference with their scanning systems. The ship's technicians attributed it to the dense layer of radio signals surrounding the planet. "Sir," Thompson called out, his voice carrying a note of concern. "3 of our probes have gone offline. The interference seems to be affecting their navigation systems." Gray frowned. This was unusual, but not alarming. "Switch to backup frequencies and launch replacement probes, and have engineering analyze that interference pattern." The next few hours brought more small issues. Communication with the probes became increasingly unreliable. Some of the fleet's more sensitive instruments began showing irregular readings. Even the quantum communication links between ships experienced occasional glitches. In the ship's engineering section, Junior Technician Smith stared at his diagnostic screens with growing unease. The interference patterns weren't random. They showed subtle structures, like layers built up over decades of broadcasting. But when he tried to report his findings, his superiors dismissed his concerns. "It's just electromagnetic noise," his supervisor said. "These primitives don't even understand basic quantum principles. Their radio waves can't possibly affect our systems." Meanwhile, on Earth, a different kind of discovery was taking place. At a radio astronomy facility in a remote valley, Dr. Thompson worked through the night, studying the signals coming from the alien fleet. 20 years of researching deep space radio emissions had taught her to recognize patterns others might miss. "Look at how our signals are interacting with their ships," she explained to the military officers who had arrived at her facility. "The electromagnetic web we've created around Earth, it's not just random noise. It's like we've accidentally built a planetary defense system without even knowing it." The officers were skeptical, but they couldn't ignore the data. Every time the alien probes encountered certain combinations of Earth's broadcast signals, they malfunctioned. It wasn't consistent enough to be a weapon yet, but it suggested possibilities. Back in orbit, Admiral Gray prepared to move forward with standard first contact protocols. His fleet would demonstrate their power by neutralizing Earth's major military installations, then offer protection and technological advancement in exchange for joining the Union. It was a strategy that had worked countless times before. "Begin positioning the fleet for the demonstration," he ordered. "Target their largest military bases first." As the Union ships moved into their attack formation, more system glitches appeared. Navigation computers took longer to calculate positions. Energy readouts fluctuated. Communication delays grew longer. But none of it seemed serious enough to delay the mission. Gray stood on his bridge, watching Earth grow larger on the main screen. Soon, these primitives would understand their place in the galaxy. Soon, they would join the countless other worlds that had submitted to the Union's superior technology and culture. He had no way of knowing that Earth's apparent weakness, its chaotic, overlapping web of radio signals, was about to become his fleet's greatest nightmare. The humans, dismissed as primitive and harmless, were about to teach the Stellar Union a lesson about underestimating inferior technology. What Gray saw as inefficiency was about to become efficiency's worst enemy. The problem started small, like tiny cracks in a dam. In the engine room of the Union flagship, Junior Technician Smith watched his instruments with growing concern. The interference patterns were getting stronger, and they definitely weren't random. Every time Earth rotated, bringing its most populated regions into view, the distortions in their systems grew worse. "Look at this pattern," Smith said to his colleague, pointing at the screen. "It's like waves in a pond, but they're made of radio signals, and they're bouncing off each other, creating new patterns." His fellow technician shrugged. "Just noise from their primitive broadcasts. Nothing our systems can't handle." But Smith wasn't convinced. He'd spent years maintaining the fleet's quantum communication systems, and he'd never seen interference quite like this. The humans' radio signals seemed to be interacting with each other in ways that created complex, ever-changing patterns. It reminded him of the neural networks in Union computers, but on a planetary scale. Above Earth, more Union probes were failing. Some simply stopped responding, while others reported impossible readings before going dark. The fleet's commanders blamed poor maintenance and ordered more probes launched, but the failure rate kept climbing. In the ship's medical bay, Dr. Wells noticed something odd. The crew members who worked closest to the scanning arrays were reporting headaches and strange dreams. Nothing serious, but unusual for people protected by the Union's advanced health technology. When she tried to report it up the chain of command, her concerns were dismissed as routine stress symptoms. Meanwhile, on Earth, governments worldwide were mobilizing for what they assumed would be humanity's last stand. Military bases buzzed with activity as soldiers prepared weapons that everyone feared would be useless against the alien threat. But in a handful of research facilities around the globe, a different kind of preparation was underway. Dr. Thompson hadn't slept in 2 days. Her small team of radio astronomers had been analyzing every scrap of data they could get about the alien ships, and what they found was fascinating. The Union's technology, for all its advancement, had a weakness. Their quantum systems were incredibly precise, but that precision made them vulnerable to certain types of interference. It's like trying to have a quiet conversation in a room full of people talking. She explained to the military officials gathered in her lab. A few voices you can ignore. But when thousands of signals overlap and reflect off each other, it creates a kind of electromagnetic chaos that their systems can't filter out. The officials exchanged skeptical looks. "Are you saying we can fight their fleet with radio waves?" General Roberts asked, his voice heavy with doubt. "Not exactly," Thompson replied. "But look at this." She pointed to a graph showing the alien probe failure rate. The failures spike whenever the probes pass through areas with dense overlapping broadcast signals. If we could amplify this effect. On the Union flagship, Admiral Gray was getting impatient. The preliminary scans were taking longer than expected, and the probe losses were becoming expensive. He called a meeting of his senior staff to discuss the situation. "These technical issues are becoming annoying," he said, looking around the conference room. "I want solutions, not excuses." Captain Miller cleared his throat. "Sir, engineering reports that the interference is affecting more systems than initially thought. We might want to consider moving the fleet to a higher orbit until we can properly shield." "Absolutely not," Gray cut him off. "I won't have it said that the 7th Fleet was pushed back by primitive radio waves. Increase power to the shields and proceed with the operation as planned." In the corner of the room, Smith shifted uncomfortably. He'd been invited to present his findings about the interference patterns, but now he wondered if speaking up would only make things worse. Still, he had to try. "Sir," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I believe the humans' broadcast network is more significant than we realized. The signals aren't just random noise. They're creating a kind of—" He struggled to find simple words for a complex concept, a kind of living electromagnetic field around their planet. The room fell silent. Then several officers laughed. Gray didn't laugh, but his expression made it clear what he thought of the theory. "Technician Smith," he said coldly, "I suggest you focus on maintaining our systems rather than inventing threats where none exist. This meeting is concluded." As the officers filed out, Miller held Smith back. "That took courage," he said quietly, "and for what it's worth, I think you might be right. Keep monitoring those patterns. Just be more discreet about reporting them." Back on Earth, Dr. Thompson's team had made a breakthrough. They discovered that certain combinations of broadcast frequencies seemed to create stronger interference effects. Military commanders worldwide began quietly ordering changes to their radio and television broadcast patterns, testing different frequency combinations. The Union fleet, unaware of the deliberate nature of these changes, continued their preparation for the demonstration of force. But more systems were starting to show strain. Navigation computers took twice as long to calculate positions. Quantum communication links between ships dropped out randomly. Even the artificial gravity flickered occasionally. In his quarters, Admiral Gray reviewed the latest status reports with growing frustration. Something wasn't right, but he couldn't put his finger on it. His instincts, honed by decades of military service, told him he was missing something important. But his pride wouldn't let him acknowledge that a primitive world like Earth could pose any real threat to his fleet. Smith, monitoring the interference patterns from his station, saw what was coming. The humans were learning, adapting their broadcast patterns. The chaotic web of signals around their planet was becoming more organized, more focused. It wasn't a weapon yet, but it was getting closer. As Earth's night side turned toward the fleet, bringing the heavily populated regions of Asia and Europe into view, the interference reached new levels. Shield generators started drawing more power. Quantum processors began showing errors. And in the space between the fleet and Earth, the invisible web of human broadcasts grew stronger, denser, more complex. The storm was coming, and only a few people on either side recognized it. Humanity's greatest weakness, its cluttered, inefficient, overlapping communication networks, was about to become its greatest strength. And the Union's greatest strength, its advanced, precise, quantum technology, was about to become its greatest vulnerability. The question was, who would realize it first? Dr. Thompson stared at her computer screen, her coffee long forgotten and cold. The latest data from worldwide broadcasting stations confirmed what she'd suspected. Earth's radio signals weren't just interfering with alien systems, they were starting to synchronize in unexpected ways. Decades of overlapping broadcasts had created something new, something that even the aliens' advanced technology couldn't handle. It's like we built a planetary defense system by accident, she explained to General Roberts, who had become a regular visitor to her lab. Every radio tower, every TV station, every satellite. They're all part of it. We just never realized what we had. The general leaned over her shoulder, studying the complex patterns on the screen. Can we control it? Make it stronger? We're learning how. She pulled up another display. Look at what happened when we adjusted the broadcast frequencies in Asia. 3 more alien probes went dark in that sector. Above the planet, the Union fleet was facing more serious problems. Shield generators were running hot, quantum computers were showing error rates far above normal, and communication between ships was becoming increasingly difficult. In the engine room of the flagship, Smith worked frantically to keep systems online. The interference is everywhere now, he told Captain Miller during an emergency briefing. It's like trying to swim through thick mud. Our quantum systems can't maintain coherence. Miller nodded grimly. The Admiral needs to know the full extent of this. No more sugarcoating the reports. But when they brought their findings to Admiral Gray, his response surprised them. Instead of anger, he showed only cold determination. So the primitives have found a way to disrupt our systems. Interesting, but ultimately futile. Prepare the fleet for immediate attack. We'll show them what real power looks like. On Earth, military leaders were gathering in a secure bunker to discuss humanity's defense plans. Dr. Thompson's discoveries had given them hope, but they needed more than just interference to stop an alien invasion. We've confirmed that our broadcast network affects their ships, General Roberts announced to the assembled commanders. Now we need to turn that effect into a weapon. A technician raised his hand. Sir, we've been experimenting with different frequency combinations. When we align multiple broadcasts in specific patterns, the interference effect gets much stronger. Like turning up the volume? Someone asked. More like turning chaos into order, Dr. Thompson explained. We're teaching Earth's electromagnetic field to dance to our tune. All around the planet, broadcast stations began changing their transmission patterns. Radio towers adjusted their frequencies. TV stations modified their signal strength. Communications satellites shifted their beams. Slowly, the random noise of human broadcasts became more focused, more directed. In orbit, the effects were immediate. Union ships started reporting critical system failures. Quantum computers crashed and rebooted randomly. Shield generators overloaded. Navigation systems showed impossible readings. Smith watched in fascination as the interference patterns shifted. "They're learning," he whispered. "The humans are actually learning how to use this." Captain Miller stood beside him, watching the disaster unfold on multiple screens. "We need to tell the Admiral. This is beyond simple interference now." But Admiral Gray had already made his decision. "Launch the attack," he ordered, his voice hard with determination. "Full power to all weapons. We'll burn through whatever primitive defense they're trying to create." The Union fleet began moving into attack formation, their weapons charging. But something was wrong. The ships weren't moving in sync anymore. Some drifted off course, their navigation systems confused by the strengthening electromagnetic field. Others reported weapon systems failing to charge properly. On Earth, Dr. Thompson and her team worked frantically to coordinate the global broadcast network. Every radio station, every TV transmitter, every satellite dish had become part of humanity's defense. The chaotic web of signals that had grown around Earth over decades was transforming into something else, a shield made of pure electromagnetic energy. "Look at this," one of her assistants called out. "The patterns are self-reinforcing now. It's like the signals are learning from each other." Dr. Thompson rushed to his station. The displays showed something remarkable. Earth's broadcast network wasn't just creating interference anymore. It was adapting, evolving, becoming more effective at disrupting alien technology with each passing minute. In the Union fleet, panic was starting to spread. Ships were losing power, weapons wouldn't fire, and communication systems were failing completely. The precise, advanced quantum technology that made their civilization so powerful had become their greatest weakness. "Sir," Captain Miller reported to Admiral Gray, "we're losing control of the fleet. Whatever the humans are doing, it's getting stronger. We need to retreat before." A massive surge of electromagnetic energy washed over the fleet. Quantum computers crashed. Shield generators overloaded. Navigation systems went dark. The mighty ships of the Union hung in space, their technology rendered useless by what they had dismissed as primitive noise. Smith, watching from his engineering station, finally understood what he'd been seeing in the interference patterns. "It's beautiful," he said to nobody in particular. "They turned their entire civilization's communication network into a weapon, not by design, but by accident, by being inefficient and messy and human." Admiral Gray stood on his bridge, watching helplessly as his fleet systems failed one by one. The humans' radio waves, which he had dismissed as primitive and harmless, had become an unstoppable force. Their chaotic, overlapping broadcasts had evolved into something his advanced technology couldn't fight. On Earth, Dr. Thompson allowed herself a small smile as the data confirmed what they were seeing. "We did it," she said quietly. "We actually did it." General Roberts put a hand on her shoulder. "What exactly did we do, Doctor?" She looked up at the screens showing the paralyzed alien fleet. "We proved that sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't the ones you design. Sometimes they're the ones you create by accident, by simply living and growing and being human." The battle wasn't over. Far from it. But in this moment, humanity had shown that even their supposed weaknesses could become strengths. Their messy, inefficient, beautiful web of communications had become a shield that even the most advanced alien technology couldn't penetrate. And somewhere in the static of 1,000 radio stations, in the signals of countless TV broadcasts, in the endless chatter of human communication, a new kind of defense was being born. Admiral Gray watched in horror as his mighty fleet drifted helplessly in Earth's orbit. The quantum computers that controlled everything from weapons to life support were failing across all ships. Warning signals flashed on every screen, showing system after system shutting down or behaving erratically. "Status report," he demanded, though he already knew it would be bad. Captain Miller's voice was tight with tension. "Sir, we've lost weapons control on 30% of the fleet. Navigation systems are failing across all ships. Shield generators are operating at less than half power, and the interference is still getting stronger. On the main screen, Earth continued its peaceful rotation, but now they could all see what they'd missed before. The planet glowed with an intricate web of electromagnetic energy, visible to their sensors as a complex, shifting pattern of light. What they had dismissed as primitive radio noise had become a weapon more powerful than anything in the Union's arsenal. In the engine room, Smith worked desperately to keep the flagship's critical systems online. The quantum processors were showing impossible error rates, their delicate calculations disrupted by the increasingly powerful human broadcasts. Even the artificial gravity was starting to flicker. "We need to shut down all non-essential systems," he told his engineering team. "Focus power on life support and basic navigation. Everything else is just making us more vulnerable to their interference." But it was already too late. The humans had learned to control their electromagnetic web, and they were using it with devastating effect. Each time Earth's most populated regions rotated into view, a new wave of interference swept through the fleet, bringing down more systems. On Earth's surface, Dr. Thompson coordinated with broadcast stations worldwide, fine-tuning their attack. "Increase power to all transmitters in the Asian sector," she ordered. "Europe, shift your frequencies to match. North America, stand by for synchronized burst." The effect was immediate and devastating. A massive surge of electromagnetic energy washed over the Union fleet. Ships that had already been struggling completely lost power. Others found their quantum systems corrupted beyond recovery. Even the flagship's advanced shielding couldn't protect it from the assault. Admiral Gray stumbled as his ship's artificial gravity failed again. "Launch fighters," he commanded. "They can't have affected our smaller craft as badly." But when the fighter bays opened, only a handful of ships managed to launch. The rest sat lifeless, their control systems scrambled by the human broadcasts. The few that did make it into space began behaving erratically, their navigation systems unable to cope with the electromagnetic chaos surrounding them. "Sir," Captain Miller reported, his face pale, "we're detecting power buildups in several ships' quantum cores. If we can't stabilize them." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what would happen if a quantum core lost containment. The Union's most advanced technology was becoming a liability, threatening to destroy the very ships it powered. On Earth, military forces had moved to their final positions. While the electromagnetic attack had effectively paralyzed the alien fleet, they weren't taking any chances. Conventional weapons, missiles, fighters, and anti-satellite systems stood ready to strike if any alien ship managed to push through the interference. "Look at this," Dr. Thompson said to General Roberts, pointing to her displays. "Their quantum systems are trying to adapt, but they can't handle the complexity of our broadcast patterns. It's like trying to play chess while the rules keep changing." The general nodded grimly. "Keep pushing. We need to force them to retreat before they figure out a way around this." In orbit, the situation was becoming desperate. Several Union ships had been forced to jettison their quantum cores before they could explode. Others drifted helplessly, their crews struggling to maintain basic life support with failing systems. The mighty Seventh Fleet, terror of 1,000 worlds, had been brought low by what they had dismissed as primitive technology. Smith rushed onto the bridge, ignoring protocol in his urgency. "Admiral, we need to withdraw immediately. The interference is starting to affect our containment fields. If we stay here much longer." A violent shudder ran through the flagship, emphasizing his point. Warning sirens blared as more systems crashed. Admiral Gray stood at his command post, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. Everything he knew about technological superiority, about the natural order of advancement, was being proven wrong. These humans, with their crude radio waves and chaotic broadcasting, had found a way to defeat the most advanced technology in known space. "Sir," Captain Miller said quietly, "if we don't retreat now, we'll lose the entire fleet. The humans have won this round." Gray wanted to argue, to demand one final attack, but he knew it would be suicide. Already, several ships were reporting critical failures in their life support systems. The proud vessels of the Union were being reduced to drifting hulks by nothing more than radio waves. "Send the retreat signal," he ordered, his voice heavy with defeat. "All ships to fall back to minimum safe distance." But retreat proved almost as difficult as fighting. The humans' electromagnetic web had grown so strong that it was interfering with their faster-than-light drive systems. Ships that tried to jump to safety found their quantum fields collapsing, leaving them stranded in normal space. From her lab, Dr. Thompson watched the aliens' desperate attempts to escape. "They still don't understand," she said to her team. "Their technology is too perfect, too precise. Our messy, overlapping signals create patterns they can't predict or counter." The Union fleet began a slow, humiliating retreat using conventional engines, limping away from Earth while trying to keep their failing systems online. Ships that had arrived as proud conquerors now fled like wounded animals, their superior technology rendered useless by humanity's primitive broadcasts. As the fleet retreated, Smith made one final note in his technical log. "The humans never built this weapon. They created it by accident, through decades of inefficient, overlapping communication. Their weakness became their strength, and our strength became our weakness." The universe, it seems, has a sense of irony. The battle wasn't completely over. Somewhere out there, the Stellar Union was surely planning its response. But for now, Earth had won its first interstellar war using nothing more than radio waves and human ingenuity. The aliens had thought Earth's technology was harmless until it erased their fleet from space. 3 days after the battle, Earth's skies still crackled with enhanced radio broadcasts. Nobody wanted to take chances by powering down the defensive network too soon. The few alien ships that remained in orbit hung silent and dark, their crews evacuated by emergency shuttles before their quantum cores could fail completely. Dr. Thompson stood at her lab window, watching the sunrise. On her desk, screens showed the continuing evolution of Earth's electromagnetic defense web. What had started as a desperate improvisation had grown into something remarkable, a planetary shield created from nothing more than human communication. "The latest data is in," her assistant said, bringing over a tablet. "The broadcast pattern is self-sustaining now. Even if we powered down half our transmitters, the interference effect would continue." She nodded, unsurprised. "We created something alive," she said quietly. "Not alive like we are, but alive in its own way. All our radio shows, phone calls, and TV broadcasts, they've woven themselves into something new." In orbit, teams of engineers in heavily shielded shuttles were studying the abandoned Union ships. They worked carefully, knowing that any active quantum technology would be instantly disrupted by Earth's new defense system. What they found amazed them. "Their technology is incredible," one engineer reported to General Roberts. "But it's also incredibly vulnerable. They built everything on quantum systems, never thinking they might encounter something that could disrupt quantum coherence on a massive scale." The general smiled. "And we disrupted it with technology they thought was primitive. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." Meanwhile, on the far side of the moon, Admiral Gray faced the most difficult moment of his career. His surviving ships had gathered there, using the moon's bulk to shield them from the worst of Earth's electromagnetic interference. Now he had to contact Union Command and report his failure. "The humans," he said into his communication unit, "have developed a defense system we cannot counter. Their planetary broadcast network has evolved into a weapon that renders our quantum technology useless. I recommend classifying Earth as a protected world, too dangerous to approach." The response from Command was immediate and harsh. They demanded details, explanations, plans for a counterattack. Gray had none to offer. How could he explain that humanity's greatest weapon had been created by accident, through decades of inefficient communication methods that advanced civilizations had long abandoned? Back on Earth, Smith had made a different choice. After the retreat order, he had asked for asylum, wanting to study the phenomenon that had defeated the Union's technology. Now he worked with Dr. Thompson's team, helping them understand both the alien technology and how Earth's broadcasts had affected it. "It's beautiful," he said, watching the patterns on the monitoring screens. "Your species built this without even knowing what you were creating." Every time someone turned on a radio, watched television, or made a phone call, they added another thread to the web. Dr. Thompson nodded. "We always thought we needed to abandon radio waves and move to more advanced technology. Instead, we just needed to understand what we already had. Around the world, things were changing quickly. The knowledge that humanity was not alone, and that Earth could defend itself, had transformed society overnight. Nations that had been enemies found themselves working together to maintain and improve the broadcast defense network. Old radio towers, once considered obsolete, were repaired and upgraded. But the most profound changes were happening in the scientific community. The study of Earth's electromagnetic web opened new fields of research. Scientists discovered that the complex patterns of human broadcasts had created something like a planetary nervous system, a network that could be tuned to defend against any quantum-based technology. "We need to be ready," General Roberts told a meeting of world leaders. "The Union will be back, and next time they'll try to find a way around our defenses." But Smith, who knew Union thinking better than anyone, wasn't so sure. "You don't understand," he told the general. "The Union builds everything on quantum technology. Your broadcast web doesn't just disrupt their weapons, it disrupts their entire civilization. They can't fight you without completely rebuilding their technology from the ground up." The Union must have reached the same conclusion. A week after the battle, they sent a message, not from their usual quantum communication systems, but broadcast on simple radio waves. They proposed a treaty, recognizing Earth as a sovereign world and promising to share non-quantum technology in exchange for studying Earth's unique defensive capabilities. Dr. Thompson read the message twice before responding. "They still don't understand," she told her team. "They think we designed this as a weapon. They don't realize it's just the natural result of billions of humans talking to each other in the most inefficient way possible." The world's leaders debated the Union's offer. Some wanted to refuse all contact, to keep Earth isolated and safe behind its electromagnetic shield. Others saw an opportunity to join the galactic community on equal terms, protected by humanity's accidental superweapon. In the end, they chose a middle path. Earth would establish diplomatic relations with the Union, but maintain its broadcast network at full strength. Humanity would share its knowledge of radio technology, but only after ensuring that the planetary defense system could not be compromised. Smith, watching Earth's cities light up as night fell, reflected on the irony of it all. The Union had come to Earth expecting to find a primitive civilization barely worth conquering. Instead, they had discovered that sometimes the most powerful technologies weren't the most advanced ones. They were the ones that had grown naturally, shaped by the daily lives and needs of billions of people. "Your people never stopped using radio waves," he told Dr. Thompson one evening. "Every other civilization abandoned them as soon as they discovered quantum communication. But humans kept broadcasting, filling their world with signals, creating something unique in the galaxy." She smiled. "We didn't know any better, and that turned out to be our greatest strength." High above Earth, the abandoned Union ships served as a reminder of that strength. Their dead quantum cores and frozen systems stood as monuments to the danger of underestimating primitive technology. And in the complex dance of radio waves that surrounded the planet, humanity's greatest weakness had become its perfect defense. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor after all.